At family dinner, I accidentally saw my mother and sister using my fake signature to access the trust fund. I just smiled and listened. None of them knew that those accounts had just $1 left and a red alert. Game over. I've been preparing for this dinner for 3 weeks. But no one at this table knows that. The chandelier above us costs more than most people make in a year. All Murano glass and gold leaf, casting fractured light across my mother's carefully neutral face and my sister's perfectly practiced smile. The dining room smells like rosemary and roasted garlic, like old money and older secrets, like the kind of comfort that comes with a price tag most people can't imagine paying. My mother hired a new chef last month, someone trained in Paris, someone who understands that presentation matters almost as much as taste, someone who knows that wealthy people don't just eat food, they consume experiences. They purchase moments that can be photographed and envied and used as evidence of a life well lived. I'm wearing the dress my sister bought me for Christmas 2 years ago. The one she said made me look approachable, which I understood even then meant less threatening, less likely to outshine her at whatever event she deemed important that season. It's navy blue, conservative, forgettable. I paired it with the pearl earrings our grandmother left me, the ones my mother suggested several times might look better on Victoria, my sister, given her complexion, her bone structure, her general superiority in all things aesthetic and social. I declined politely each time, and each time I watched my mother's mouth tighten just slightly at the corners, that particular expression she reserves for disappointments she can't voice without seeming petty. The roasted chicken sits between us like a centerpiece, golden and glistening, surrounded by fingerling potatoes and roasted vegetables that have been arranged with the kind of casual precision that takes years to master. My mother cuts her food with surgical precision, each movement economical and exact, the way she does everything, the way she's taught us to move through the world as if we're always being watched, always being judged, always one careless gesture away from revealing that we're not quite as refined as we pretend to be. The Hendersons are selling their place in the Hamptons, my mother says, her voice carrying that particular tone she uses when delivering information she considers significant, when she wants us to understand that she's connected to networks of wealth and influence that matter, that she knows things before other people know them, that she's always 3 steps ahead in whatever game we're playing. Apparently, Thomas made some rather questionable investments. The whole family is downsizing. Victoria makes a sympathetic noise, the kind of sound that suggests concern without requiring actual emotional investment. The kind of response that's become second nature to all of us over years of practicing the performance of caring. How unfortunate, she says, reaching for her wineglass, her engagement ring catching the light in a way that seems almost deliberate, almost choreographed, because with Victoria, everything is deliberate, and everything is choreographed, everything is calculated for maximum impact with minimum effort. I take a sip of water and say nothing, which is what I've been doing for most of my life, which is what they expect from me, which is what makes me invisible in all the ways that matter. My silence has always been interpreted as agreement, as submission, as evidence that I lack the intelligence or the confidence or the ambition to contribute anything meaningful to these conversations about money and status and the constant, exhausting work of maintaining our position in a hierarchy that none of us created, but all of us enforce. "Caroline, you're being quiet," my mother observes. And there's something in her tone that sounds like concern, but feels like surveillance. Like she's checking to make sure I'm still playing my assigned role, still staying in my designated lane, still accepting the script she wrote for me before I was old enough to hold a pen. I smile. The same smile I've been perfecting since childhood, the one that suggests contentment without claiming happiness, the one that takes up as little space as possible. Just tired from work, I say, which is true enough, which is vague enough, which is exactly the kind of non-answer that satisfies without inviting follow-up questions. Victoria laughs. That particular laugh she reserves for moments when she wants to establish hierarchy, when she wants to remind everyone at the table of their relative positions in the family ecosystem. I don't know how you do it, honestly, working those hours for that organization. It's admirable, really. But darling, you could do so much better. Mother and I were just talking about how Marcus's firm is always looking for people. And with your education, with your background, you could actually make something of yourself instead of wasting your time with those charity cases. The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you develop a very specific skill set, a particular kind of patience that looks like passivity, but is actually strategy. A way of moving through the world that makes you forgettable in the moment, but allows you to see everything, to hear everything, to collect information while everyone else is busy performing their importance. I've been collecting information for a very long time. I like my work, I say simply, cutting into my chicken, watching the juice run clear across the white porcelain plate that probably costs more than my monthly rent, more than the monthly rent of most people I work with. People who would find this entire dinner obscene. People who would look at this table laden with food and wine and crystal and see not abundance but grotesque excess. Not success, but something much darker, much more complicated. My mother exchanges a glance with Victoria. One of those wordless communications they've perfected over years of alliance. Over years of presenting a united front against my father when he was alive. Against me now that he's gone. Against anyone who threatens the carefully constructed narrative they've built about who we are, what we deserve, how the world should arrange itself around their needs and desires, an endlessly expanding sense of entitlement. Your father would have wanted more for you, my mother says, and there it is. The weapon she's been holding in reserve, the one she knows, still has the power to wound. The invocation of my father as both shield and sword, as proof that she speaks for the dead, that she channels his wishes, that she knows what he would have wanted, even though he's been gone for 5 years, even though they barely spoke during the last decade of his life, even though their marriage was more performance than partnership, long before cancer finally gave him an exit strategy. I could tell her that my father wanted a lot of things he never got. That he spent his final months in a hospital bed looking at me with eyes that said I'm sorry for leaving you with them. That his last coherent words to me were, be smarter than I was. But I don't, because this dinner isn't about truth. This dinner is about the performance of family, the maintenance of appearances, the preservation of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. I'm sure he would be proud of the work I'm doing, I say instead. My voice even, my face pleasant. My entire demeanor suggesting someone who lacks the imagination to be insulted. Someone who accepts criticism as guidance. Someone who is grateful for the attention of her betters. Victoria cuts in, her voice warm with the kind of full sisterly concern that makes my skin crawl. the kind of performance she's perfected for audiences, the kind of role she plays when she wants something. We just worry about you, Caroline. You're so isolated in that tiny apartment, working all the time, no social life to speak of. When was the last time you went on a date? When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Something fun, something that wasn't about saving the world or proving a point or whatever it is you think you're accomplishing with all that earnest do-gooding. I could tell her that I went on a date last week, that his name is David, and he's a corporate attorney who thinks my work is fascinating, who asks questions and actually listens to the answers, who doesn't measure my worth by my wardrobe or my social connections or my willingness to prioritize his ego over my intelligence. I could tell her that I have a social life that doesn't revolve around charity galas and country clubs, that I have friends who know me as something other than the disappointing younger daughter, the one who didn't marry well, the one who insists on having a career in non-profit work instead of doing something respectable, something that generates the kind of wealth and status that can be displayed and envied and used as evidence of successful parenting. But I don't tell her any of that, because the less they know about my actual life, the better. Because privacy is power. Because the moment they know something about me is the moment they'll find a way to weaponize it, to use it against me, to turn it into evidence of my inadequacy or my poor judgment or my general failure to live up to the standards they've established for acceptable existence within this family. I'm doing fine, I say, and I let them interpret that however they want. Let them read into my tone whatever confirms their existing beliefs about my life, my choices, my fundamental inability to achieve the kind of success they recognize as legitimate. The conversation moves on, flowing around me like water around a stone. And I let it, contributing just enough to avoid seeming sullen or withdrawn, laughing at appropriate moments, nodding when expected, performing the role of the younger daughter who knows her place, who accepts her position, who has made peace with being the less favored child, the one who will never quite measure up, the one whose primary function is to make Victoria look better by comparison. My mother starts talking about the foundation, the charitable organization she chairs, the one that bears my father's name and supposedly honors his legacy, but mostly serves as a networking opportunity for wealthy people who want to feel virtuous without actually redistributing any significant portion of their wealth. She's planning a gala for next month, something elaborate and expensive that will raise money for whatever cause is fashionable this season. Whatever issue allows wealthy people to feel enlightened and engaged without requiring them to examine the systems that created their wealth in the first place. We're thinking of making it a masquerade theme, Victoria says, her eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm she reserves for parties, for events, for opportunities to be photographed and admired and celebrated as the kind of woman who supports important causes while wearing expensive dresses. Something elegant, mysterious, a bit theatrical. What do you think, Caroline? Will you actually attend this year? Or will you find another excuse to avoid spending time with your own family? The barb is delivered with a smile, with a tone that could be interpreted as playful if you didn't know better. If you hadn't spent your entire life learning to decode the subtle cruelties embedded in Victoria's seemingly innocent observations. She knows I hate these events, knows I find them performative and hollow, knows I'd rather spend an evening doing literally anything else. And she knows that by framing my absence as a personal rejection rather than a philosophical disagreement, she can make me look selfish, antisocial, ungrateful for the opportunities I've been given. I'll try to make it, I say, which commits me to nothing, which leaves the door open for a last-minute conflict, which satisfies the requirements of politeness without actually agreeing to anything. My mother sets down her fork with a soft click against the plate, and I know from years of experience that this gesture means she's about to say something she considers important, something she's been planning, something that's the real reason for this dinner. Actually, there's something Victoria and I wanted to discuss with you, she says, and her voice has that particular quality that suggests this conversation has been rehearsed, that they've planned this moment, that I'm about to be presented with something they've already decided, something they expect me to accept with gratitude and grace. I take another sip of water and wait, my face carefully neutral, my body language open and receptive, giving them no reason to suspect that I've been waiting for this moment, that I've known it was coming, that I've spent weeks preparing for exactly this conversation. Victoria leans forward slightly, her expression earnest, her entire demeanor suggesting sisterly concern, familial duty, the kind of loving intervention that's actually about control, about maintaining the existing power structure, about ensuring that everyone stays in their assigned place. We've been thinking about the trust, she says. And there it is, the reason for this dinner, the explanation for the warmth and the concern and the fake interest in my life. The one Father set up for all of us. You know it's been sitting there, just accumulating value. And Mother and I think it's time to be more strategic about how we're managing those assets. The trust. My father's trust. The one he established 20 years ago when his company went public. When he suddenly had more money than he knew what to do with. When he wanted to ensure that his daughters would be provided for regardless of what happened to him, to his business, to the volatile markets that had made him wealthy in the first place. The trust that has my name on it, that requires my signature for any major decisions, that gives me equal say with Victoria and my mother in how the assets are managed and distributed. The trust they think I don't pay attention to, that they assume I've forgotten about, that they believe I'm too disinterested or too financially naive to monitor. Because I've spent years cultivating the impression that I don't care about money, that I find discussions of wealth management boring and complicated, that I'm content to let them handle the sophisticated financial matters while I focus on my little non-profit job and my simple, uncomplicated life. I didn't realize there was an issue with how the trust is currently managed, I say carefully, my tone suggesting curiosity rather than suspicion, giving them room to explain, to reveal their plans, to show me exactly what they've been planning behind my back. My mother waves a hand dismissively, a gesture that suggests my concerns are misplaced, that I'm worrying about details I don't understand, that I should trust their superior knowledge and experience. There's no issue, darling. We're just looking at opportunities. The market right now is very favorable for certain investments. And Marcus has identified some options that could significantly increase the value of the trust over the next few years. But we need all the signatures to move forward, and we thought it would be easier to just handle it all together rather than bothering you with the tedious details. Marcus, Victoria's fiancé, the hedge fund manager with the impressive resume and the aggressive investment strategy, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced a significant failure, never having lost enough to make him cautious. never having learnt that the people who promise the highest returns are often the ones most willing to take risks with other people's money. What kind of investments? I ask, and I watch Victoria's eyes flicker with something that might be irritation, might be impatience, might be the first sign that I'm not playing my assigned role quite as predictably as they expected. Victoria's smile tightens just slightly, and she exchanges another glance with our mother. One of those silent conversations that excludes me by design, that reinforces my position as the outsider, the one who doesn't quite belong, the one who needs things explained in simple terms because she lacks the sophistication to grasp complex financial concepts. It's rather technical, she says, her tone suggesting that explaining it to me would be both tedious and ultimately pointless, that I wouldn't understand even if she tried to break it down into manageable pieces. But essentially, Marcus has access to certain private equity opportunities that aren't available to retail investors. Opportunities that could triple our returns within 5 years if we're willing to be a bit more aggressive with our asset allocation. Private equity. The playground of the ultra-wealthy, the investment class that operates outside the scrutiny of public markets, that promises extraordinary returns in exchange for extraordinary risk, that's designed to make rich people richer while leaving everyone else further behind. I've read enough about private equity to know that for every success story, there are dozens of failures, companies stripped for parts, workers laid off, pensions raided, all in service of generating returns for investors who never have to see the human cost of their profits. That sounds risky, I say, my voice mild, my expression thoughtful rather than challenging, giving them an opening to reassure me, to explain why I'm wrong to worry, to demonstrate their superior understanding of financial markets and investment strategy. My mother's laugh is warm, indulgent. The kind of sound you make when a child says something adorably naive, when someone reveals their ignorance in a way that is almost endearing. All investing involves some risk, Caroline. But that's why we have experts like Marcus, people who understand these markets, who know how to evaluate opportunities and manage exposure. Your father would have appreciated the chance to grow his legacy, rather than letting it sit in conservative investments that barely keep pace with inflation. There it is again. The invocation of my father, the suggestion that he would support their plan, that he would want his wealth deployed aggressively, that he would approve of putting his life's work into the hands of a hedge fund manager he never met. A man who's marrying his daughter for reasons that have more to do with social climbing than genuine affection. My father, who spent his last years moving money into stable, boring investments because he'd learned that wealth preservation matters more than wealth accumulation. That the goal isn't to die with the most money, but to ensure that what you leave behind actually helps the people you care about, was obsessed with making sure that Victoria and I would be secure, that we'd have resources to fall back on if we needed them, that we'd never be forced to make compromises or accept situations that diminished us because we lacked financial options. I'd like to see the specific proposals before I sign anything, I say. And I watch both of them stiffen slightly. Watch their masks slip just enough to reveal the frustration underneath, the irritation at my unexpected resistance, my refusal to simply trust their judgment and sign where they tell me to sign. Victoria's voice takes on an edge, sharp enough to cut, but still wrapped in the appearance of sisterly concern. Of course, but we need to move quickly on this. These opportunities don't stay open forever. And if we miss this window because you need time to study financial documents you won't fully understand anyway, we all lose out. Is that really what you want? To cost the family money because you're being unnecessarily cautious? The manipulation is so obvious it's almost insulting. The attempt to frame my reasonable request as selfishness, as obstruction, as evidence that I'm letting my lack of financial sophistication harm the whole family. They're counting on me to back down, to apologize for being difficult, to sign whatever they put in front of me, rather than risk seeming like I'm not a team player, not sufficiently committed to the family's collective interests. I'm not trying to be difficult, I say, my voice soft, apologetic, giving them what they want while buying myself time. I just want to understand what I'm signing. Surely that's reasonable. My mother sighs, the kind of long-suffering exhale that suggests she's being infinitely patient with someone who's testing her limits. Of course it's reasonable, darling. We'll have Marcus put together a summary for you, something straightforward that explains the basics without overwhelming you with unnecessary complexity. But we really do need to move on this soon. The due diligence period closes in 2 weeks. And if we're going to participate in this round of funding, we need all the signatures by then. 2 weeks. They're giving me 2 weeks to review and approve a major reorganization of a trust worth several $1 million. 2 weeks to evaluate investments in companies I've never heard of, in industries I may not understand, in deals structured by people I have no reason to trust. 2 weeks that they clearly expect to be sufficient because they believe I lack the knowledge, or the attention span, or the basic competence to actually scrutinize what they're asking me to sign. What they don't know, what they've never bothered to find out because they've never bothered to ask, is that I've spent the last 5 years working for a non-profit that provides legal and financial assistance to low-income families, that I've become intimately familiar with how wealthy people use complex financial instruments to hide assets and avoid taxes and protect themselves from the consequences of their decisions. What they don't know is that I've spent countless evenings reviewing trust documents and corporate filings and SEC disclosures, that I've developed a very specific expertise in exactly the kind of financial sleight of hand they're attempting right now. What they definitely don't know is that I've been monitoring the trust for the last 3 months, ever since I noticed some unusual activity in the quarterly statements, small withdrawals that technically didn't require my signature because they fell below the threshold specified in the trust documents, but that added up to a pattern, a systematic extraction of funds that suggested someone was treating the trust like a personal checking account rather than a protected asset with specific legal restrictions and fiduciary responsibilities. That should be fine, I say, smiling, playing my role perfectly, the dutiful daughter who trusts her family, who assumes the best of people, who lacks the imagination to suspect that her own mother and sister might be lying to her face. I appreciate you both thinking of me and including me in these decisions. The relief on their faces is almost comical, almost sad, the visible release of tension that comes from believing they've successfully managed me, that they've overcome my brief moment of resistance, that everything is proceeding according to plan. Victoria reaches across the table and squeezes my hand, her touch warm and sisterly, her eyes bright with what I might mistake for genuine affection if I didn't know better. If I hadn't learned decades ago that Victoria's love is always conditional, always transactional, always calibrated to serve her interests rather than mine. I'm so glad you understand, she says, and I nod, letting her believe it. letting them both believe that I'm still the same Caroline they've always known, the one who accepts their version of reality, who trusts their good intentions, who signs where they tell her to sign because it's easier than arguing, safer than asserting herself, more comfortable than acknowledging the fundamental inequality that structures every interaction we have. The dinner continues, the conversation moving on to lighter topics and to gossip about people I don't know, to plans for the upcoming gala, to Victoria's wedding preparations and my mother's latest home renovation project and all the minutiae of wealthy people's lives. All the concerns that fill the days when you don't have to worry about money, when your basic needs are so thoroughly met that you can dedicate enormous energy to questions of aesthetics and status and the endless project of maintaining your position in hierarchies that matter only to the people within them. I participate just enough to seem engaged, laughing at appropriate moments, offering occasional observations that suggest I'm paying attention without actually contributing anything of substance, playing my role so perfectly that neither of them notices when I excuse myself to use the bathroom, when I slip quietly down the hallway toward my mother's home office, when I take exactly 90 seconds to photograph several documents I find sitting on her desk, documents that shouldn't be there, documents that confirm everything I've suspected for the last 3 months. Bank statements showing repeated transfers from the trust to accounts in Victoria's name. Email printouts discussing investment opportunities that bear no resemblance to the conservative strategy outlined in the trust documents. A handwritten note in my mother's distinctive script, outlining a plan to restructure the trust in a way that would significantly dilute my stake while maintaining their control. And most damning of all, several pages that appear to be contracts or agreements bearing signatures that look remarkably like mine, but that I definitely never signed. Documents authorizing transactions I never approved. Papers that represent what I think lawyers call fraud, what normal people call stealing. I return to the table with my phone in my pocket, and my face carefully neutral. And I finish my dinner with the same pleasant detachment I've maintained all evening. And I hug my mother goodbye and accept Victoria's air kisses and promise to review the documents Marcus sends over. And I drive home to my small apartment in my modest car. And I sit in the dark for a very long time, looking at the photographs on my phone, at the evidence of my family's betrayal, at the proof that they've been systematically stealing from me for months, possibly years, at the documentation of crimes that could send them to prison if I chose to pursue that route. But prison isn't what I want, isn't what I've been planning to, isn't the kind of revenge that would actually satisfy the cold fury that's been building in my chest for longer than I want to admit. Prison would be too quick, too clean, too much like mercy for people who've spent my entire life treating me like an inconvenience, like an obstacle, like someone whose primary purpose is to make their lives easier and their victories more impressive. By contrast, no, what I want is something slower, something more poetic, something that will teach them exactly what it feels like to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to discover too late that the person they thought was powerless has been holding all the leads the entire time. I open my laptop and begin composing an email to David, the corporate attorney I've been dating, the one who specializes in trust and estate law, the one who's been helping me understand the legal mechanisms my father put in place to protect us, to protect me. The safeguards he built into the trust documents that my mother and Victoria either don't understand or have chosen to ignore. I attach the photographs I took this evening, along with 3 months of documentation I've been carefully collecting, along with a summary of what I believe has been happening and what I'd like to do about it. His response comes within an hour, brief and professional, confirming what I already suspected: that they've committed multiple acts of fraud, that they've violated their fiduciary duties, that they've left a paper trail so obvious that any competent attorney could build an airtight case against them. But more importantly, he confirms that my father built something into the trust that my mother and Victoria clearly don't know about. A provision that gives me the power to freeze all accounts if I have reasonable suspicion of fraud or mismanagement. A nuclear option that my father included specifically to protect his daughters from predatory relatives or unscrupulous advisors, or anyone who might try to take advantage of young women who suddenly found themselves wealthy. I think my father knew my mother better than he let on, knew what she was capable of, knew that she might try something exactly like this once he was gone, once there was no one left to stop her, once she had access to resources without accountability, without supervision, without anyone watching closely enough to notice what she was doing. The freezing mechanism is elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. One phone call to the trust administrator, one formal notification of suspected fraud, one invocation of the protective clause my father embedded in the legal documents, and every account associated with the trust locks down completely, inaccessible to anyone including me, frozen until a formal investigation can be conducted, until the allegations can be examined, until the truth can be established through proper legal channels. It's the kind of file that should probably scare me, the kind of weapon that could destroy my family completely, that could expose them not just to legal consequences, but to social humiliation, to the kind of scandal that wealthy people fear more than poverty. The revelation that they're not who they pretend to be, that their wealth is built on theft, that their carefully maintained image of respectability and success is nothing more than performance, nothing more than lies. I should probably feel guilty about what I'm planning to do, should probably experience some hesitation about deploying this nuclear option against my own mother and sister, should probably worry about the consequences of tearing my family apart over money, over pride, over the accumulated resentments of a lifetime of being treated as less than, as not quite enough, as the daughter who disappoints simply by existing. But I don't feel guilty. I feel clear. I feel focused. I feel like I'm finally taking action after years of accepting unacceptable treatment, after decades of swallowing my anger and my hurt and my fundamental knowledge that I deserve better than this, that I deserve a family that values me for who I am rather than tolerating me because they have to, because we share DNA, because abandoning me completely would look bad at parties. I spend the next 2 weeks playing my role perfectly, responding promptly to the emails Victoria sends with increasing frequency, asking clarifying questions that make me seem engaged and interested, scheduling calls with Marcus where I ask the kind of basic questions that confirm his assumption that I'm financially naive, that I'm easy to manipulate, that I'll ultimately sign whatever they put in front of me because I lack the knowledge or the confidence to push back against their expertise. I attend a lunch with my mother where she expresses relief that I'm being so cooperative, where she mentions casually that she was worried I might be difficult about the trust restructuring, where she says she's proud of me for being mature enough to recognize that sometimes we have to trust other people's judgment, that we can't always understand everything ourselves, that accepting our limitations is a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. I smile and nod, and thank her for her guidance. And I watch her relax completely. Watch her assume that everything is proceeding according to plan. Watch her confidence grow as she believes she's successfully managed me into compliance, into submission, into my proper place in the family hierarchy. 3 days before the signature deadline, I receive a package from Victoria containing the final trust restructuring documents, several dozen pages of dense legal language that she clearly expects me to sign without reading carefully, that she's structured to make it as easy as possible for me to just initial and date in all the right places. That includes a prepaid overnight envelope so I can return the signed documents immediately, so we don't miss the window, so everyone gets what they want. I read every word of those documents 3 times, and with each reading I discover new insults, new indignities, new evidence of exactly how little they think of me, how thoroughly they've planned to cut me out of my father's legacy while maintaining the appearance of treating me fairly. The restructuring would give my mother and Victoria voting control over all trust decisions, would reduce my distributions to a fixed amount, regardless of how the trust performs, would essentially convert my status from equal beneficiary to dependent charity case, someone who receives an allowance rather than someone who has ownership, someone who should be grateful for what she gets rather than someone who has rights, who has power, who has equal standing. The documents are drafted cleverly enough that someone without legal training might miss the implications, might see the complexity and assume it's just standard trust language, might focus on the promised returns and miss the fundamental shift in power that's buried in subordinate clauses and technical definitions and references to other documents that aren't included in the package. But I see it, I understand it, I recognize it for what it is, which is theft dressed up as financial planning, disinheritance disguised as strategic asset management, betrayal wrapped in the language of family loyalty and collective interest. I place the unsigned documents on my kitchen table and I take photographs of every page. And then I make the phone call I've been planning for 3 weeks, the one to the trust administrator, the one where I invoke the fraud protection clause, the one where I formally request an immediate freeze on all trust accounts pending investigation of suspected unauthorized transactions and signature forgery. The administrator is professional and sympathetic, confirming that he'll initiate the freeze immediately, that all beneficiaries will be notified within 24 hours, that the trust will remain frozen until a formal review can be conducted, that this is a serious matter but that my father was wise to include these protections, that it's better to be cautious when there's any possibility of fraud or mismanagement. I hang up the phone and I sit very still in my quiet apartment, and I wait for the fallout. Wait for the moment when my mother and Victoria discover that their accounts are frozen, that they can't access the money they've been spending so freely, that someone has finally noticed what they've been doing, that the person they underestimated has been paying attention the entire time. The call comes at 7:43 the next morning, my mother's number lighting up my phone screen, and I let it ring 4 times before I answer, because I want her to feel the weight, want her to experience just a moment of uncertainty, want her to wonder if I'm going to answer at all. "Caroline, what the hell have you done?" Her voice is sharp, stripped of its usual careful modulation, raw with fury and fear and the dawning realization that something has gone very wrong with her plans. I keep my voice calm, pleasant, giving her nothing to grab onto, no emotional reaction she can weaponize against me. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mother. Is something wrong? Don't play stupid with me. The venom in her voice is almost refreshing. The honesty of it, the dropping of all pretense that we're anything other than adversaries, that our relationship contains any genuine affection or respect. The trust is frozen. All the accounts are locked. The administrator said you filed a fraud complaint. This is insane, Caroline. This is vindictive and irrational, and you're going to regret this. I reviewed the quarterly statements, I say, my voice still even, still calm, still giving her nothing she can use. I notice some irregularities, several withdrawals that I don't remember authorizing, some signatures that don't quite look right. I thought it was prudent to request an investigation before I signed any additional documents. Surely you can understand that. You've always told me to be careful with financial matters, to make sure I understand what I'm signing, to protect myself from people who might try to take advantage of me. The silence on the other end of the line stretches long enough that I wonder if she's hung up. But then I hear her breathing, harsh and deliberate, the sound of someone trying to regain control, trying to find the right approach, trying to figure out how to manipulate me back into compliance. Those withdrawals were for trust expenses, she says finally, her voice regaining some of its usual smoothness, shifting into explanation mode, into the tone she uses when she's trying to make something questionable sound reasonable. Administrative costs, tax payments, things that are clearly outlined in the trust documents as appropriate uses of trust assets. You are overreacting to routine financial management. And in the process, you're making this incredibly difficult for everyone. Then an investigation should clear everything up very quickly, I say. And I let a little steel enter my voice. Let her hear something she's not used to hearing from me. Let her understand that I'm not backing down, that I'm not going to be reasoned with or threatened or guilted into withdrawing my complaint. If everything is legitimate, if all the withdrawals were appropriate, if those signatures are genuine, then the investigation will confirm that, and the accounts will be unfrozen and we can all move forward. But if there are problems, if someone has been misusing trust assets or forging signatures or violating their fiduciary duties, then I think Father would want those problems addressed, don't you? Your father would be ashamed of you right now. Her voice is cold, calculated to wound, deploying the weapon she knows has hurt me before. The suggestion that my dead father is disappointed in me, that I'm failing him somehow, that I'm not living up to his expectations or his legacy or his memory. He created this trust to take care of his family, to provide for all of us, and you're tearing it apart over your paranoid fantasies and your resentment that Victoria has always been more successful, more accomplished, more capable of managing the responsibilities that come with wealth. The manipulation is so transparent it's almost sad. The attempt to make this about sibling rivalry, about my supposed jealousy, about anything other than the systematic theft they've been committing. But I'm done letting her rewrite reality, done accepting her version of events, done allowing her to use my father's memory as a weapon against me. I think Father would be ashamed of a lot of things, I say quietly. But I'm not one of them. The investigation will proceed, Mother. I suggest you retain legal counsel if you haven't already. And tell Victoria the same thing. You're both going to need lawyers who specialize in trust litigation and fraud defense. I hang up before she can respond, before she can deploy whatever new tactic she's formulating, before she can try tears or threats or the other tools in her manipulation toolkit. My hands are shaking slightly as I set the phone down, adrenaline coursing through my system. The physiological response to confrontation finally catching up with my carefully maintained emotional control. The next call comes from Victoria 15 minutes later, and this time I don't answer. I let it go to voicemail, and then I listen to her message, to the fury and disbelief in her voice, to the accusations and the threats and the demands that I call her back immediately, that I fix this, that I stop being ridiculous and withdraws the absurd complaint before I destroy the entire family over nothing. I delete the message and I block her number, and then I block my mother's number, because I'm done having conversations that go nowhere. Done defending myself against accusations that have no basis in reality. Done trying to make them understand that what they've done is wrong, that they've violated my trust, that they've stolen from me in ways that go far beyond money. The investigation takes 6 weeks, and during that time I hear nothing from my mother or Victoria directly, though I hear through mutual acquaintances that they're telling people I've had some kind of breakdown, that I've become paranoid and unstable, that they're worried about me but I've cut off contact with the family, that they're trying to get me help but I'm refusing to be reasonable. The narrative they're constructing is predictable and almost clever, painting themselves as concerned relatives dealing with a troubled family member, positioning my accusations as symptoms of mental illness rather than legitimate legal complaints, trying to preemptively discredit whatever the investigation might discover by establishing that I'm not a reliable narrator of my own experience. But they're not counting on the fact that I've documented everything, that I have copies of every quarterly statement, every withdrawal authorization, every email communication about the trust, that I've built a paper trail that corroborates my complaints, that makes their denials increasingly implausible. They are also not counting on the fact that the trust administrator takes his fiduciary responsibilities seriously, that he's conducted a thorough forensic review of all trust transactions for the past 3 years, that he's brought in handwriting experts to examine the signatures on various documents, that he's cross-referenced bank records and email communications, and discovered a pattern of unauthorized withdrawals and forged approvals that goes back further than even I suspected. The preliminary report arrives on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by courier to my apartment, a thick envelope containing 47 pages of findings and supporting documentation. And I read it 3 times before I fully process what it's telling me. The scope of the fraud, the systematic nature of it, the sheer audacity of what my mother and Victoria have been doing. Over the past 3 years, they've extracted nearly $800,000 from the trust through various mechanisms, some of them technically legal, but ethically questionable, others clearly fraudulent, all of them conducted without my knowledge or consent. They've paid themselves consulting fees for managing trust assets, fees that aren't authorized by the trust documents. They've made loans to themselves at below-market interest rates, loans that were never repaid, loans that I never approved. They've redirected distributions that should have been divided equally among beneficiaries, keeping larger shares for themselves while giving me the minimum amount specified in the trust documents. And most damning of all, they've forged my signature on at least 17 different documents, authorizing transactions and approving investments and consenting to changes in trust administration that I knew nothing about, that I never agreed to, that represent clear violations of criminal law in addition to breaches of fiduciary duty. The evidence is overwhelming, documented in bank records and email communications, in handwriting analysis that confirms the signatures aren't mine, In testimony from financial advisors who confirmed that my mother and Victoria represented that they had my approval for various transactions when they clearly didn't, when they couldn't have, when they were lying to facilitate their theft. The report concludes with recommendations for next steps, including referral to law enforcement for criminal prosecution, civil litigation to recover the misappropriated funds, removal of my mother and Victoria as trustees and restructuring of the trust to prevent future fraud. It's dry, professional, thorough, and absolutely devastating. The kind of document that could destroy lives, that could send people to prison, that could turn a family scandal into front-page news. I sit with the report for a long time, reading through it again, studying the details of their betrayal, understanding for the first time just how little I meant to them, how thoroughly they were willing to exploit me, how far they were prepared to go to enrich themselves at my expense. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. This was systematic, planned, executed over years with careful attention to staying just below the thresholds that might trigger automatic reviews, with conscious effort to hide their activities from me, with deliberate manipulation to keep me ignorant and compliant, and grateful for whatever scraps they chose to throw my way. And the thing that hurts most, the detail that cuts deeper than the money or the fraud or the violation of trust, is that they were so certain I'd never notice, so convinced I was too stupid or too naive or too checked out to pay attention to my own finances, so confident that I'd keep playing my assigned role as the disappointing younger daughter who accepts whatever she's given without question, without protest, without the basic self-respect to demand equal treatment. They thought I was weak, thought I was manageable, thought I was someone who could be controlled and contained and quietly robbed without consequence. They were wrong. I call David and ask him to meet me for dinner. Over expensive wine in a quiet restaurant, I show him the report, and I ask him what he recommends, how he thinks I should proceed, what the likely outcomes are for different courses of action. He reads through the report carefully, making occasional notes, his face impassive in the way that lawyers learn to maintain when reviewing evidence of crimes, when processing information that implicates people in serious wrongdoing. They're fucked, he says finally, setting down the report, his professional vocabulary momentarily deserting him in favor of blunt assessment. Forgery, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly tax evasion depending on how they reported these withdrawals. The DA would love this case. It's got everything. Wealthy defendants, clear evidence, sympathetic victim. You could send them to prison if you wanted to. But, I ask, because I can hear the unspoken qualification in his voice, the suggestion that criminal prosecution might not be the best path forward. But criminal prosecution is slow, uncertain, emotionally exhausting, and very public, he says, leaning back in his chair, studying me carefully. You'd spend years in court, reliving their betrayal over and over, having your family's dysfunction examined in public hearings, dealing with media attention and social judgment, and all the mess that comes with high-profile white-collar crime cases. And at the end of it, they might get probation rather than prison time, especially if they're first-time offenders who show remorse and agree to restitution. The criminal justice system isn't really designed to provide emotional satisfaction. It's designed to process cases efficiently, and that often means plea deals and suspended sentences and outcomes that feel unsatisfying to victims. I nod slowly, understanding what he's saying, recognizing the gap between theoretical justice and practical reality, between what should happen and what actually happens in a system that's designed to move cases rather than vindicate victims. What would you recommend instead? I ask. He takes a sip of wine, considering his words carefully, and I appreciate this about him. The way he thinks before speaking. The way he respects my intelligence enough to give me thorough answers, rather than simplified reassurances. Civil litigation. Sue them for recovery of the misappropriated funds plus damages. Use the threat of criminal prosecution as leverage to force a favorable settlement. You have overwhelming evidence. They have no real defense. And the last thing they want is public exposure of what they've done. You could probably get a full restitution, plus penalties, plus removal from any future role in trust administration, all without the circus of a criminal trial. And they just walk away? I ask, and I hear the edge in my own voice, the frustration that they might escape real consequences, that they might buy their way out of prison, that justice might mean nothing more than writing a check. They walk away significantly poorer, publicly humiliated, and stripped of any control over your father's legacy, David says. They walk away knowing you beat them, that you were smarter than they gave you credit for, that they underestimated you completely. Sometimes that's more satisfying than prison, especially when you're dealing with people whose entire identity is built on status and control and the appearance of success. I think about this for a long moment, turning over the options in my mind, weighing revenge against resolution, punishment against practical outcomes. Part of me wants to see them in court, wants to watch them try to explain their actions to a judge, wants the satisfaction of criminal conviction and the permanent record of their crimes. But another part of me, the part that's been learning strategy and patience for the past 5 years, recognizes that David is right, that the most effective revenge isn't always the most dramatic one, that sometimes you hurt people more by taking away what they value most rather than putting them in cages. How long would civil litigation take? I ask. With evidence this strong? You could probably force a settlement within 6 months, maybe less if they're motivated, to avoid discovery and depositions. Most of this would happen in negotiations rather than court, which means you maintain privacy and control over the outcome. And you can always refer the case for criminal prosecution later if they refuse to settle reasonably. 6 months. Half a year to resolve a situation that's been festering my entire life. Half a year to extract justice from people who've spent decades treating me as disposable, as less than, as someone whose feelings and rights and fundamental human dignity matter less than their convenience, their comfort, their endless appetite for more. Let's do it, I say, and David nods, pulling out his phone to make notes, already shifting into attorney mode, already thinking about strategy and timeline and the mechanics of building a civil case that will extract maximum value while minimizing my exposure to counterattack. The demand letter arrives at my mother's house 3 days later, delivered by process server, a formal legal document outlining the allegations, the evidence, the amounts owed, and the consequences of refusing to negotiate in good faith. It's the kind of letter that destroys illusions, that makes clear this isn't going away, that I'm not backing down, that the daughter they thought they could ignore has retained serious legal counsel and is prepared to pursue this as far as necessary. My mother's attorney calls David within hours, his tone aggressive and dismissive, arguing that this is a family dispute that should be resolved privately, suggesting that I'm being vindictive and unreasonable, threatening to countersue for defamation and emotional distress, and whatever other claims he thinks might intimidate me into withdrawing my complaint. David listens patiently and then responds in the kind of calm, measured tone that makes it clear he's not impressed, not intimidated, not interested in playing legal chicken with someone who has no leverage. He offers to send over the full investigation report, the forensic analysis, the handwriting expert's findings, all the evidence that makes this a very simple case with a very predictable outcome. He suggests that maybe the attorney should review the evidence before making threats. That maybe he should advise his clients to consider settlement rather than prolonging a case they cannot win. That maybe everyone would benefit from acknowledging reality rather than doubling down on positions that will collapse under scrutiny. The attorney calls back 2 hours later with a substantially different tone, and David schedules a settlement conference for the following week. And the process grinds forward with the inexorable momentum of the legal system. When it has clear evidence and motivated parties and a situation that everyone would prefer to resolve quickly and quietly. I don't attend the settlement conference. David handles it on my behalf, but he calls me afterward with updates, telling me about my mother's tears, about Victoria's anger, about the attorney's attempts to negotiate down the restitution amount, to spread out the payment schedule, to minimize the consequences of their actions while maintaining some shred of dignity. David is unmoved by the theatrics, by the claims that they can't afford full restitution, by the suggestions that I'm being cruel to demand they liquidate assets to repay what they stole. He presents the evidence methodically. He references the criminal statutes they violated. He makes clear that my offer of settlement is generous compared to what they'd face in criminal court. And he gives them exactly 72 hours to accept or reject the terms before we proceed with formal litigation and criminal referral. They accept 48 hours later, signing agreements that require full restitution of $800,000 plus $200,000 in penalties and damages, paid in a lump sum within 30 days. They agree to resign as trustees, to relinquish any future control over the trust, to never again involve themselves in my financial affairs, without my explicit written consent. They agree to a confidentiality clause that prevents them from discussing the settlement publicly. And in exchange, I agree not to pursue criminal prosecution as long as they comply with all terms of the agreement. It's comprehensive, it's legally binding, and it's as close to complete victory as civil litigation can provide. I've recovered everything they took plus penalties. I've removed them from positions of power. I've established clear boundaries that they cannot cross without facing serious consequences. I've won in every meaningful way, and they know it, and they'll spend the rest of their lives knowing that the daughter they underestimated completely destroyed their plans and their assumptions and their fundamental belief in their own superiority. The money arrives in the trust account exactly 30 days after they signed the agreement, transferred from various accounts they had to liquidate, assets they had to sell, investments they had to cash out early and at a loss. I don't take any pleasure in imagining the conversations they must have had with their accountants and financial advisors, the explanations they had to provide, the questions they had to answer about why they suddenly needed to raise $800,000 in cash. But I don't feel sorry for them either. Don't experience any guilt about the inconvenience I've caused them, the disruption to their carefully planned financial strategies. They stole from me. They lied to me. They violated every bond of family and trust and basic human decency. And now they're experiencing consequences. paying a price that's still less than they deserve, but more than they expected. Learning what happens when you underestimate someone, when you assume weakness is the same thing as powerlessness. The trust is restructured with a new administrator, someone I selected after careful research, someone with impeccable credentials and no previous relationship with my family, someone who takes fiduciary duty seriously and won't be charmed or manipulated or convinced to look the other way when irregularities appear. The new trust documents are simpler, clearer, with stricter controls and better oversight mechanisms, with requirements for my approval on any transaction over a minimal threshold, with protections that make it almost impossible for anyone to repeat what my mother and Victoria did. I increase my own monthly distributions, not to the excessive levels Victoria was taking, but to an amount that reflects my actual share of the trust income, that allows me to live comfortably rather than constantly budgeting, that provides cushion for emergencies and opportunities without requiring me to ask permission or justify my needs to anyone. I establish charitable giving accounts for causes I care about, directing trust funds toward organizations that actually help people, rather than providing tax deductions and networking opportunities for the wealthy. And I continue working at my nonprofit, continue doing the work that matters to me, continue helping families navigate financial and legal systems that are designed to exploit them, to confuse them, to extract value while providing minimal support. I'm good at this work, good at recognizing the patterns of exploitation because I've experienced them myself. Good at helping people understand their rights because I've had to fight for my own. Good at believing in people's capacity to overcome difficult circumstances because I've proven to myself that underestimation isn't destiny. That the people who dismiss you often do so because they're afraid of what you might become if you realized your own power. 3 months after the settlement, I get an invitation to Victoria's wedding, formal and expensive, addressed to Miss Caroline Henderson and guest. As if nothing has happened, as if we're still family in any meaningful sense, as if our relationship can simply resume now that the legal matters are resolved, now that the money has been repaid, now that enough time has passed for everyone to pretend that the unpleasantness is behind us. The invitation includes a handwritten note from Victoria, her distinctive script flowing across expensive stationery, expressing hope that I'll attend, suggesting that it's time to move forward, to focus on the future rather than dwelling on past misunderstandings, to remember that we're family regardless of our differences, that blood is thicker than legal disputes, that surely I can find it in my heart to forgive and forget and be present for one of the most important days of her life. The manipulation is so familiar, it's almost comforting. The appeal to family obligation, the framing of systematic fraud as a misunderstanding, the suggestion that my continued distance is a choice to hold grudges rather than a reasonable response to being robbed by my own relatives. She's counting on social pressure, on the expectation that I'll prioritize family harmony over my own feelings, on the assumption that I'll eventually back down, forgive, resume my assigned role, because that's what good daughters do, what good sisters do, what decent people do when family asks for reconciliation. I RSVP that I will not attend, and I don't elaborate, don't explain. Don't give her any additional information she can use to argue or negotiate or attempt to change my mind. My absence is my statement, my boundary, my clear signal that our relationship ended when she decided to steal from me, when she chose money over integrity, when she demonstrated that I matter to her only insofar as I'm useful, compliant, willing to accept whatever crumbs she chooses to offer. I hear later, through mutual connections, that my absence was noted, that people asked questions, that Victoria told them I was dealing with personal issues, that our mother suggested I'd become somewhat unstable, that they both performed concern and sadness, while privately relieved that I didn't attend and forced them to acknowledge publicly what happened between us, to explain why their sister chose to miss this milestone, to account for the fracture in family relationships that they prefer to keep private. The wedding photos appear on social media. Victoria glowing in an expensive dress. Marcus handsome in his tuxedo. My mother elegant and proud. Everyone smiling for cameras. Everyone performing happiness and family unity. Everyone maintaining the fiction that everything is fine. That we're a normal wealthy family. Celebrating a normal wealthy wedding. That there's nothing missing. No one absent who matters. No relationships fractured beyond repair. I look at the photos once, and then I close the browser. And I don't think about them again, because they're not my family anymore. Not in any way that matters. Not in any sense beyond genetic accident and shared history. Family is supposed to be the people who protect you, who support you, who value you for who you are rather than what you can provide them. Family is supposed to be safe, and they've proven themselves to be anything but safe, proven themselves to be exactly the kind of people my father was trying to protect me from when he built those safeguards into the trust, when he gave me the power to freeze accounts if I suspected fraud, when he created mechanisms that would reveal the truth even after he was gone. I think he knew. I think he suspected what my mother might do, what Victoria might become. And he tried to give me tools to protect myself, tried to ensure I'd have resources and options and the ability to defend my interests, even against family members who saw me as an obstacle rather than a person. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He stayed in a marriage that made him unhappy for reasons I'll probably never fully understand. But he loved me in the ways he knew how, in the ways he could. In the concrete provisions of legal documents that outlasted him and ultimately saved me from people who wore his last name but never shared his integrity. 6 months after Victoria's wedding, I meet David's family at a casual dinner, and they're warm and welcoming and genuinely interested in my work, in my life, in my thoughts about things that have nothing to do with money or status or maintaining appearances. His mother asks about the nonprofit where I work and actually listens to my answers, asks follow-up questions, wants to understand not just what I do, but why it matters, why I chose this path, what I find meaningful about helping people navigate systems that were designed to exclude them. His sister is funny and irreverent, telling stories about their childhood that reveal a family culture so different from mine that it's almost disorienting. A family where disagreements are normal, and forgiveness is real, and love isn't conditional on performance, on success, on meeting expectations that shift, depending on what serves the family narrative in any given moment. They tease each other, but the teasing is affectionate, playful, built on foundation of genuine care, rather than weaponized to establish hierarchy, to maintain dominance, to remind everyone of their relative position in family power structures. I find myself relaxing in ways I didn't know were possible with family, or with people who might become family, people who see me as someone worth knowing rather than someone to be managed, controlled, kept in assigned roles that serve their interests rather than mine. I tell stories about my work and they laugh at the funny parts and get angry at the unjust parts and ask questions that suggest they're actually listening, actually interested, actually engaged with me as a person, rather than performing interest while waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. David's father asks about my own family, and I give the simplest answer I have, the one I've been practicing, the one that's true without requiring me to explain the whole complicated mess. We're not really in contact anymore, I say, and he nods with a kind of understanding that suggests he gets it, that he knows families are complicated, that sometimes the healthiest choice is distance. That blood relation doesn't obligate you to accept abuse or exploitation or relationships that diminish you. Their loss, he says simply. And something in my chest loosens just slightly. Some knot of shame or guilt or internalized belief that I'm the one who failed. That I'm the one who should have tried harder. That I'm the one responsible for the fracture. Because I wouldn't just forgive and forget and resume playing my assigned role in their drama. It's not my loss, it's theirs. They're the ones who traded a relationship with me for money they didn't need, for control they didn't deserve, for the temporary satisfaction of the believing they'd gotten away with something. That they'd successfully exploited someone they thought was too weak or too stupid or too naive to notice what they were doing. A year after the settlement, I'm promoted at work, given more responsibility and a significant raise, recognition for the outcomes I've achieved, the families I've helped, the systems I've learned to navigate on behalf of people who lack the resources or the knowledge or the confidence to advocate for themselves. My supervisor tells me I have a gift for this work, an ability to understand complex situations and find practical solutions. A talent for explaining difficult concepts in ways that empower people rather than confusing them. A quality of presence that makes clients feel heard, valued, worthy of the time and effort required to help them solve their problems. The praise feels strange because I'm not used to being valued for my competence, for my intelligence, for my ability to do difficult work well. I'm used to being valued for my compliance, for my willingness to stay small, for my capacity to make other people look good by contrast. But this is different. This is recognition for actual achievement, for skills I've developed, for work I'm genuinely good at. And I discover that this kind of validation feels fundamentally different from the conditional approval I grew up seeking. The kind that depended on meeting expectations that changed whenever I got close to achieving them. I celebrate the promotion with David and a small group of friends, people I've collected over the years, people who know me as Caroline the attorney who does advocacy work. Not Caroline the disappointing younger daughter. Not Caroline the one who couldn't quite measure up to her sister's achievements. Not Caroline the family problem, who eventually had to be cut off because she insisted on making things difficult by demanding honesty, accountability, basic respect. We go to dinner at a nice restaurant, nothing ostentatious but comfortable, the kind of place where the food is good and the atmosphere is relaxed, and conversation flows easily, because no one is performing, no one is competing. No one is using the evening as an opportunity to establish dominance or display wealth, or remind everyone else of their relative positions in social hierarchies that matter only to people trapped in systems of comparison and competition. My friends ask about the promotion, and I tell them about the new responsibilities, the cases I'll be handling, the policy work I'm getting involved in, the opportunities to make systemic changes rather than just helping individuals navigate broken systems. They're genuinely happy for me, genuinely interested, genuinely celebrating my success without any undertone of resentment or competition, or the subtle undermining that characterized every achievement in my family of origin. One of my friends, Sarah, raises her glass and proposes a toast to Caroline, who proves every day that the people who underestimate you are usually the ones most afraid of what you might become. Everyone laughs and drinks, and the moment passes, but the words stay with me, settling into some place in my chest, where I've been collecting evidence that I'm not who my mother and sister said I was. That their version of me was always more about their needs than my reality. That their consistent message, that I wasn't good enough, said more about them than it ever said about me. 2 years after the settlement, I get an email from my mother. Her first attempt at contact since the legal proceedings concluded. Since the money was repaid. Since they signed agreements never to involve themselves in my financial affairs without explicit permission. The email is long and rambling, full of justifications and explanations, and attempts to rewrite history, to reframe what happened as a misunderstanding rather than a crime, as a family dispute rather than systematic fraud, as something I should be willing to forgive now that enough time has passed. Now that surely I've had time to gain perspective, to recognize that families are complicated, that everyone makes mistakes, that holding grudges only hurts the person doing the holding. She doesn't apologize, not really, not in any way that takes responsibility for what she did. She expresses regret that things turned out the way they did, sadness that our family has fractured, hope that someday I'll be willing to let go of my anger and remember the good times, the happy memories, the years before everything fell apart. She mentions Victoria's pregnancy, suggests that becoming an aunt might help me understand the importance of family, the necessity of forgiveness, the value of moving forward rather than staying trapped in past hurts. She's fishing for a response, looking for any opening she can exploit, any sign that I'm softening, that I might be willing to resume contact on terms that allow her to avoid full accountability, to maintain some version of the fiction that she's a good mother who did her best, who made some mistakes but never intended harm, who deserves forgiveness because she's family, because she gave birth to me, because blood relation creates obligations that transcend betrayal. I read the email 3 times and then I delete it without responding. And I block her email address the same way I blocked her phone number 2 years ago. Because I know from experience that engagement is what she wants. That any response would be interpreted as an opening, as evidence that I'm willing to negotiate, to discuss, to potentially be talked back into accepting a relationship on her terms rather than mine. My silence is my answer, my boundary, my clear statement that we are done, that there is no path forward that includes her in my life, that the bridge between us wasn't damaged. It was burned deliberately and thoroughly, and there's no rebuilding it, no going back, no future where I trust her enough to be vulnerable, to share my life, to give her access to information she could use to hurt me. 3 years after the settlement, David and I get married in a small ceremony with close friends. No family drama, no complicated dynamics. No one using the wedding as an opportunity to compete or display wealth or remind everyone of their importance. We exchange vows we wrote ourselves, promising to be honest with each other, to respect each other's autonomy, to build a partnership based on genuine equality rather than performed complementarity, to create a relationship that doesn't require either of us to be less than we are in order to make the other feel more important. My colleagues from work attend, friends I've made over years of doing this work, doing it well. building a reputation as someone who can be trusted, who follows through, who cares about outcomes more than credit. David's family is there, warm and welcoming, treating me like I've always been one of them, like my integration into their family circle is natural and easy and doesn't require me to perform or prove myself or earn acceptance through careful management of their expectations. There are no representatives from my family of origin, no last-minute attempts at reconciliation, no dramatic appearances designed to force a confrontation or demand acknowledgement. I sent no invitations, and they made no requests, and their absence is notable only in how little it hurts, how much I've healed from the wounds they inflicted, how thoroughly I've built a life that doesn't include them, doesn't need them, doesn't leave space for the particular kind of damage they're capable of inflicting. During the reception, my boss gives a toast about my work, about the families I've helped, about the changes I've helped implement in systems that were designed to be incomprehensible, to discourage people from accessing benefits they're entitled to maintain barriers that keep the vulnerable vulnerable. She talks about my ability to see through complexity, to find practical solutions, about my patience with people who are overwhelmed and scared and convinced they can't navigate these systems, about my gift for making difficult things understandable, for empowering people to advocate for themselves rather than creating dependency. I watch David's face while she's speaking, and I see pride there, genuine pleasure in my achievements, happiness that has nothing to do with how my success reflects on him, nothing to do with competition or comparison or any need to establish that his accomplishments are more impressive, more important, more deserving of attention and praise. He's proud of me because he loves me, because he values the work I do, because he recognizes that my competence and my compassion and my commitment to helping people are things worth celebrating, worth supporting, worth building a life around. This is what healthy love looks like, I realize. This is what family should feel like. People who celebrate your successes without needing to diminish them, who support your choices without requiring you to justify them, who see you as a complete person rather than a collection of roles and functions and responsibilities that serve their needs. 4 years after the settlement, I'm invited to speak at a conference about financial exploitation of vulnerable populations, about the tactics that predatory relatives use, about the legal mechanisms available to protect people from fraud even when the perpetrators are family members. I almost decline because public speaking still makes me nervous, because talking about my own experience requires a level of vulnerability that doesn't come naturally, because part of me still carries shame about what happened, even though intellectually I know I have nothing to be ashamed of, that I was the victim, that their actions reflect on them rather than on me. But David encourages me to accept, reminds me that my story could help other people recognize similar patterns in their own lives, could empower them to take action, could demonstrate that fighting back is possible even when it seems impossible, even when the people exploiting you are family members who society expects you to protect, to forgive, to accommodate, regardless of how they treat you. I write the speech carefully, finding ways to tell my story that preserve necessary privacy, while illustrating the broader patterns, the common tactics that financial predators use regardless of whether they're strangers or relatives, the warning signs that often get dismissed because we don't want to believe that family members would steal from us would lie to us, would systematically exploit our trust for their own benefit. I talk about the importance of monitoring your own accounts, about the protective mechanisms that can be built into trusts and estates, about the resources available to people who suspect they're being exploited but don't know how to prove it, don't know where to turn, don't have the financial resources to hire expensive attorneys to fight battles that seem unwinnable. I talk about my father's foresight in building fraud protections into the trust documents, about how those protections ultimately saved me, about how people who genuinely care about your well-being will want you to have safeguards, will want you to be protected, will support your autonomy rather than requiring you to trust blindly, to accept their judgment without question, to give up control in exchange for their supposed expertise. And I talk about the emotional dimension, about the grief of losing family, about the particular pain of being betrayed by people who are supposed to love you, about the long process of learning to trust again, to believe that not everyone is looking for ways to exploit you, to understand that the problem wasn't that you were too naive or too trusting, but that they were willing to betray that trust, that the flaw was in their character rather than in your judgment. The response is overwhelming. People approaching me afterward to share their own stories, to thank me for speaking about something that's often hidden, often shameful, often dismissed as not real abuse because it's just money, just financial manipulation, not the kind of violence that leaves physical scars even though it leaves scars of a different kind, wounds that affect your ability to trust, to believe in your own judgment, to feel safe in relationships that require vulnerability. A woman in her 60s tells me about her son who's been stealing from her for years, forging her signature on checks, accessing her accounts, spending money she needs for medical care and basic living expenses. She thought it was her fault, thought she should have raised him better, thought she must have done something wrong if her own child would treat her this way. She's been too ashamed to tell anyone, too afraid of being judged as a bad mother, too worried about what people would think if they knew her son was robbing her. I give her contact information for legal aid services, for elder abuse hotlines, for organizations that can help her understand her options and take action to protect herself. I tell her it's not her fault, that she didn't fail as a mother, that his choices are his responsibility, regardless of how he was raised, that protecting herself isn't being disloyal or vindictive. It's being smart. It's being self-protective. It's choosing to prioritize her own well-being over his temporary convenience. She cries and thanks me, and I recognize myself in her. The shame and the guilt and the internalized belief that somehow she's responsible for being victimized, that she should have prevented it, that admitting what's happening is admitting failure rather than identifying abuse. I think about my mother's email, about her attempt to frame what happened as a misunderstanding, about her suggestion that I should forgive and move on and remember that family is important. I think about how that narrative serves her, protects her, allows her to avoid accountability while positioning me as the problem, as the one who's being unreasonable, as the one who's prioritizing grudges over family harmony. And I think about how many people accept that narrative, believe that framing, internalize the message that protecting yourself from family members who exploit you is somehow wrong, somehow selfish, somehow evidence that you're not a good person, not sufficiently committed to family values, not willing to put relationship ahead of personal grievance. The cultural messages around family are so powerful, so pervasive, so deeply embedded in how we understand ourselves and our obligations that it takes tremendous strength to resist them, to say no, actually. Family doesn't entitle you to exploit me. Blood relation doesn't create unlimited obligation. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse in silence. 5 years after the settlement, I run into Victoria at a charity event I didn't know she'd be attending. One of those awkward social encounters that feels inevitable in retrospect. That you know will happen eventually in a city where wealthy people circulate through similar spaces, attend similar events, move through overlapping networks of professional and social connection. She sees me first, and I watch her face go through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise and something that might be fear, and then a careful neutrality that suggests she's decided on a strategy, chosen an approach, prepared herself for this interaction, even though she clearly wasn't expecting it. She approaches me during the cocktail hour, her smile practiced and careful, her voice warm but cautious, testing to see how I'll respond, whether I'll be civil or hostile or simply indifferent. "Caroline," she says, and I hear years of history in the way she says my name. Years of dismissal and competition, and the casual cruelty of someone who never had to consider my feelings, because my feelings were never a priority. "It's good to see you. You look well." I could make this easy for her, could respond with similar warmth, could pretend that enough time has passed for us to be cordial, to exchange pleasantries, to perform normalcy, as if nothing happened, as if she didn't steal from me, as if our relationship wasn't destroyed by her choices, by her actions, by her fundamental willingness to prioritize money over basic human decency. But I don't owe her ease, don't owe her comfort, don't owe her the performance of civility that would allow her to feel better about herself, to tell herself that things are basically okay between us, that time has healed wounds that she never actually tried to rebound. "Victoria," I acknowledge, my voice neutral, giving her nothing, no warmth but no active hostility, just the basic minimum of recognition that we exist in the same space, that we share a history, that we are technically still related by biology, if nothing else. She waits for me to say more, and when I don't, when I simply stand there looking at her with calm indifference, she shifts uncomfortably, her prepared script apparently not accounting for simple silence, for my refusal to engage beyond basic acknowledgement. "I've thought about reaching out," she says finally, her voice softer now, more uncertain, revealing something underneath the careful performance, something that might be genuine feeling or might just be discomfort at this unexpected encounter, at my refusal to make this easy for her. "Mother said she emailed you a few years ago and never heard back. We've wanted to talk, to try to repair things, to find some way to move forward." The we is interesting. The assumption that she and our mother are a unit, that they speak with one voice, that their interests and their desires and their version of events are unified, that I'm the one outside this family coalition, the one who needs to be brought back in, managed back into compliance, convinced to resume my assigned role. "There's nothing to repair," I say simply, and I watch her face register surprise. Maybe confusion, maybe the dawning understanding that I'm not interested in reconciliation, not interested in rebuilding, not interested in any version of relationship that includes either of them. "You made choices, I made choices, we're living with the consequences. That's all there is." "But we're family," she says, and there's something almost plaintive in her voice now. something that sounds like genuine distress, though I can't tell if it's distress at losing our relationship or distress at failing to control the narrative, failing to bring me back into line, failing to resolve this situation in a way that allows her to feel good about herself. No, I say quietly, and I feel the truth of it as I speak. The clarity that's come from 5 years of building a life without them, 5 years of understanding what family should feel like, what it looks like when people actually care about you rather than what you can provide them. We're related. That's genetics. Family is something else. Family is people who support you, who respect you, who wouldn't steal from you and then try to blame you for being upset about it. We're not family. We're just people who happen to share DNA. She flinches like I've struck her. And maybe in some way I have. Maybe this is the first time anyone has said clearly and directly that what she did has permanent consequences. That some things can't be forgiven. That some betrayals are final. That she doesn't get to decide unilaterally that enough time has passed for everything to be okay again. Caroline, we made mistakes, she says, her voice taking on that tone I remember from childhood. The one she uses when she's trying to manipulate, to convince, to reshape reality, to suit her needs. But everyone makes mistakes. Surely, after all this time, you can find it in your heart to forgive us, to give us another chance, to remember all the good times we had before everything went wrong. The good times. I search my memory for these mythical good times she's referencing, these periods of family harmony and genuine connection that supposedly existed before the fraud, before the betrayal, before everything went wrong. I find very few. I find moments of performance, occasions when we played our assigned roles convincingly enough to fool outsiders, events that looked like family togetherness but felt like obligation, like duty, like the exhausting work of pretending we liked each other more than we actually did. The good times weren't that good, I say, and I watch her face register shock, genuine surprise, that I would challenge this narrative, that I would suggest our childhood wasn't the idyllic experience she apparently remembers, or has convinced herself to remember. And they don't excuse what you did. You and Mother systematically stole from me for years. You forged my signature. You violated my trust in every possible way. And then when you got caught, you tried to paint me as the problem, as the one being unreasonable, as the one who should just get over it and move on. That's not how this works, Victoria. That's not how any of this works. You got your money back, she says. And now there's an edge in her voice, frustration breaking through the careful performance of sisterly concern. We paid you back everything, with penalties. We complied with every term of that settlement. What more do you want? How long are you going to punish us for one mistake? One mistake. $800,000 extracted over 3 years through systematic fraud, reduced to one mistake in her version of events. In the story she tells herself to maintain her self-image as the good person, as someone who just made an error in judgment, as someone who deserves forgiveness because she's sorry, because she paid restitution, because surely 5 years is long enough to hold a grudge. I don't want anything from you, I say. And I mean it, feel the truth of it settling into my bones. The recognition that there's nothing she can give me that I want. Nothing she can offer that would make me willing to reopen this door, Bshar. To give her access to my life. to risk experiencing again the particular kind of pain that comes from being betrayed by someone who's supposed to love you. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to accept that we're done, that there's no relationship to repair, that the best thing you can do for me is to stay out of my life completely. That's incredibly selfish, she says. And there it is. The accusation I've been expecting. The attempt to make my boundary into evidence of my character flaw. My refusal to forgive into proof that I'm the problem, that I'm the one behaving badly, that I'm the one who should be ashamed. Maybe, I say. And I smile. And I see her register that I'm not defensive, not apologetic, not interested in debating whether my choices are selfish or justified or appropriate according to whatever standards she thinks should govern this situation. But it's my decision to make. You don't get a vote. You lost that privilege when you decided to steal from me. I walk away before she can respond, before she can deploy whatever other manipulation tactics she's prepared, before she can try tears or anger or any of the other tools in her arsenal. I feel her watching me as I cross the room, feel the weight of her attention, feel something that might be satisfaction, that I maintained my boundary, that I didn't back down, that I didn't let her guilt me into reconsidering, into giving her another chance to hurt me. David finds me a few minutes later, reads something in my face that tells him I've had an encounter, that something has happened, that I need a moment, or maybe need to leave entirely. You okay? He asks. And I appreciate the simplicity of the question, the lack of the assumption, the willingness to let me define what I need rather than telling me what I should feel or how I should respond. I ran into Victoria, I say, and he nods, understanding immediately, knowing enough of the history to recognize what that means, what it must have cost me. Want to leave? He asks, and I consider it. Consider letting this encounter drive me out of an event I was actually enjoying, letting Victoria's presence dictate my choices, giving her that power over my decisions even now, even 5 years later, even after everything. No, I say, and I feel strength in the decision, feel something shift in my understanding of how much power they still have over me, how much I've healed, how far I've come from the person I was 5 years ago, the one who would have left immediately, who would have let their presence shrink my world, limit my choices, make me smaller. No, I'm going to stay. I'm going to enjoy this event. She's the one who should be uncomfortable, not me. And I do stay. I do enjoy the rest of the evening. I talk to people I know and people I'm meeting for the first time. I'm present and engaged and genuinely interested in the conversations I'm having. And I don't spend the rest of the night looking over my shoulder or avoiding certain areas of the room or letting the encounter with Victoria dominate my thoughts or ruin my experience. I see her leave early, see her slip out during the program with her husband trailing behind her, and I feel nothing. Not satisfaction at driving her away, not guilt at making her uncomfortable. Just a mild observation that she's gone, that her departure changes nothing about my evening, that her presence or absence is increasingly irrelevant to my life, to my happiness, to my sense of peace with the decisions I've made. 6 years after the settlement, my father's estate is finally fully settled. The last of the legal proceedings concluded, the final accounting completed, all assets distributed according to the terms of his will and the trust documents. The process took longer than anyone expected. complicated by the fraud investigation, by the settlement negotiations, by various legal challenges that my mother and Victoria attempted to raise and that were eventually dismissed or withdrawn. The final distribution is smaller than it would have been if they hadn't stolen. If they hadn't extracted 800,000 before I discovered what they were doing. If they hadn't spent years treating the trust as their personal bank account. But it's still substantial. Still more than enough to provide security, to fund the life I want to build, to support the work I care about without requiring me to compromise, to make choices based on financial pressure rather than genuine preference. I use some of the money to buy a house. Something modest by the standards I grew up with, but perfect for me and David. A place with good light and a small garden and a neighborhood that's walkable, diverse, full of families and students and artists and people who measure success by different standards than my family of origin used, who value community over status, connection over competition. I use more of the money to establish my own charitable foundation, something small and focused, dedicated to providing legal and financial assistance to people who are being exploited by family members, who need help navigating systems that are designed to be incomprehensible, who lack the resources to hire expensive attorneys but deserve protection, deserve justice, deserve someone to believe them when they say they're being hurt by people who are supposed to love them. The foundation is named for my father, for the man who tried to protect me even after death, who built safeguards that ultimately saved me, who understood that love sometimes means giving people tools to protect themselves rather than demanding they trust unconditionally that real family supports your autonomy, rather than requiring your submission. I think he would approve of what I'm doing with his legacy. Think he would appreciate that his money is being used to help people, to challenge systems that exploit the vulnerable, to create resources for people who find themselves in situations similar to what I experienced, who need someone to tell them it's not their fault, they're not crazy, they have rights, they deserve better. The Foundation's first case involves an elderly man whose daughter has been systematically stealing his retirement income, forging his signature on checks, convincing him that he's becoming forgetful, that he can't trust his own memory, that he needs her to manage his finances because he's no longer capable of handling them himself. It's a textbook case of financial elder abuse combined with gaslighting. And it makes me angry in ways that feel productive, that drive me to work harder, to be more thorough, to make sure this man gets justice, gets his money back, gets protection from further exploitation. We win the case, recover most of the stolen funds, and establish a protective arrangement that prevents the daughter from accessing his accounts without supervision. The man cries when we tell him the outcome. Tells us he thought he was going crazy, thought he was making it up, thought his daughter was right, and he was just a confused old man who couldn't keep track of his own money. You saved my life, he says. And I know he's not being dramatic. Know that financial abuse of elders often leads to worse outcomes, to people losing their homes because they can't pay bills, to people going without medication because their money has been stolen, to people dying prematurely because the stress and the shame and the betrayal literally kill them. This is what my father's money is doing now, I think. This is his real legacy. Not the performances at charity galas or the buildings with his name on them or the social status that comes from being wealthy, but actual help for actual people. Resources deployed to protect the vulnerable rather than to enhance the comfortable. Wealth used to challenge systems, rather than to benefit from them. 7 years after the settlement, I'm invited to testify before a legislative committee considering reforms to trusts and estate law. Changes that would make it harder for people to commit the kind of fraud my mother and Victoria did. That would require better oversight and more transparency, and stronger protections for beneficiaries who might not have the knowledge or the resources to monitor complex financial arrangements. I prepare testimony that draws on my personal experience and my professional work, that connects individual stories to systemic problems, that makes the case that current laws are inadequate, that they're designed to protect trustees rather than beneficiaries, that they assume good faith and honest dealing, when the reality is that family members often exploit each other precisely because they assume they can get away with it, because they believe family loyalty will prevent victims from taking legal action, because they count on shame and social pressure to keep their crimes hidden. The committee members listen carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and several of them thank me afterward for bringing attention to issues they hadn't fully understood, for putting human faces on abstract legal concepts, for helping them see how current laws fail to protect people who most need protection. One of them asks whether I've reconciled with my family, whether time has healed the breach, whether I've been able to forgive and move forward. The question is well-intentioned, I think, rooted in assumptions about how family conflicts should resolve, about the importance of forgiveness, about the value of maintaining family connections regardless of what happened. No, I say simply, and I watch mild surprise cross his face. The expectation that surely after 7 years I would have softened, would have found my way back to some kind of relationship with my mother and sister, would have prioritized family harmony over ongoing estrangement. And I don't consider that a failure. Some betrayals are final. Some relationships can't be repaired, shouldn't be repaired. Forgiveness isn't always the right answer, and maintaining family connections isn't always the healthy choice. Sometimes the best thing you can do is establish clear boundaries and build a life that doesn't include people who've proven themselves to be harmful. He nods slowly, considering this, and I wonder if he has his own experience with difficult family members, with people who demand forgiveness without offering real change, with relationships that cause more harm than they provide the benefit. That takes courage, Yahel says finally, and I appreciate the acknowledgement, the recognition that walking away from family is difficult, even when it's the right choice, even when the relationship is toxic, even when staying connected would mean accepting ongoing harm in exchange for the appearance of family unity. Later that day, I get a text from my mother, the first communication in over 2 years, bypassing the blocks I've maintained on her other contact methods. "I saw you on the news," it says, "testifying about our family. Is humiliating us publicly really necessary? Haven't you punished us enough?" I read the text 3 times, studying the framing, the assumptions embedded in every word. She's positioned herself as the victim, me as the aggressor, my testimony as punishment rather than advocacy, my public discussion of financial exploitation as an attack on her rather than an attempt to help other people avoid similar situations. She's learned nothing, I realize. Changed nothing, still believes the problem is my unwillingness to forgive, rather than her decision to steal. Still thinks she's entitled to my silence, my protection of her reputation, my complicity in maintaining the fiction that our family is normal, that nothing particularly bad happened, that time has healed wounds she never actually tried to repair. I don't respond to the text, just screenshot it and forward it to David with a note, evidence that I made the right decision. He responds immediately with a heart emoji and the words, "Absolutely you did." I block this number too. Close that avenue of contact. Maintain the boundary that's become increasingly easy to enforce, increasingly clear in my mind as not just necessary but healthy, not just protective but life-affirming, not just about them but about me, about the life I'm building, about the person I'm becoming when I'm not constantly trying to manage their expectations or accommodate their version of reality, or make myself smaller to fit into spaces they've designated for me. 8 years after the settlement, David and I have our first child, a daughter we name Eleanor after my father's mother, a woman I barely knew, but who my father described as fierce and principled and unwilling to accept disrespect from anyone. Qualities I want to embody. Qualities I want to model for this tiny person who's suddenly my responsibility, my joy, my opportunity to do better than what was done to me. The question of whether to tell my mother and Victoria about the baby comes up, raised gently by David, who believes in my judgment, but wants to make sure I've considered all angles. Wants to give me space to think through whether I might regret excluding them from this milestone, whether someday I might wish I'd given them another chance, whether Eleanor might benefit from knowing her grandmother and aunt, despite everything that happened. I think about it carefully, really consider it, rather than simply defaulting to my established boundary, and I realize that my answer is still no. Definitively and without reservation, no. Because bringing them into Eleanor's life would mean exposing her to their manipulation, their toxicity, their particular brand of conditional love that damages people, especially children, especially daughters who learn early that their value depends on their compliance, their willingness to play assigned roles, their capacity to make the important people in their lives feel good about themselves. I won't do that to her. Won't subject her to what I experienced. Won't give my mother and Victoria access to someone I love with a fierceness that's almost frightening. Someone whose well-being I will protect absolutely. Someone who deserves to grow up knowing she's valued for who she is, rather than what she can provide. Who deserves to experience unconditional love, rather than the performative alternative I grew up with. She'll ask about them eventually, David points out. And he's right, she will. She'll notice that she has grandparents and an aunt on his side, but apparently none on mine. She'll ask questions that deserve honest answers, that require me to explain complex situations in age-appropriate ways, that will force me to find language for what happened that doesn't traumatize her, but also doesn't lie to her, doesn't pretend that everything is fine when it's not. And I'll tell her the truth, I say. And I feel confident in this. Feel clear about my responsibility to be honest with her. To help her understand that family isn't guaranteed to be safe. That biology doesn't create obligation. That she has the right to establish boundaries with anyone who treats her badly, including relatives. Including people who claim to love her, but demonstrate through their actions that their love is conditional, transactional, contingent on her meeting expectations she shouldn't have to meet. I want her to grow up strong. I want her to understand her worth. I want her to know that she doesn't owe anyone access to her life just because they're related by blood. That she has the right to surround herself with people who genuinely care about her, rather than people who perform care while actually treating her as instrumental, as useful, as someone who exists to serve their needs rather than as a person with inherent value, regardless of what she achieves or provides. My mother finds out about Eleanor anyway, through mutual acquaintances, through the social networks that exist among wealthy people in the city, through the gossip that flows through charity events and country clubs, and the overlapping circles that connect people like us, whether we want those connections or not. I hear through a friend that she's hurt, that she's telling people I've denied her the chance to know her granddaughter, that she's painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable grudge, my excessive punishment for mistakes that happened nearly a decade ago, my vindictive refusal to allow healing and reconciliation. The narrative is familiar, the framing predictable, the attempt to claim victim status while ignoring what actually happened, what she actually did, why I actually made the choices I made. She's betting that most people won't know the full story, won't understand the depth of the betrayal, won't grasp that this isn't about holding grudges, but about protecting myself and now protecting my daughter from people who've proven themselves to be unsafe, untrustworthy, willing to exploit family connections for personal gain. Some people probably believe her version, probably think I'm being unnecessarily harsh, probably judge me for cutting off my family over what they imagine was a simple financial disagreement, a misunderstanding that got out of hand, a situation that could have been resolved with better communication and more willingness to compromise. I don't correct the narrative, don't defend myself in social settings, don't try to explain my decisions to people who don't have the full context and probably wouldn't change their minds anyway. The people who matter, the people who actually know me, understand why I made the choices I made. Trust my judgment, support my boundaries without requiring detailed justification. And increasingly, I find that I don't care what strangers think about my family relationships, don't feel the need to manage perceptions or control narratives, or make sure everyone understands that I'm the reasonable one, the victim, the person who was wronged. That impulse comes from a place I've mostly healed, a wound that's mostly closed, a need for external validation that's been replaced by internal certainty, by confidence in my own judgment, by peace with decisions that I know are right, even if other people don't understand them. 9 years after the settlement, I received notice that my mother has died. A heart attack, sudden and unexpected, a phone call from her attorney. Because there's no one else to make it. Because Victoria is apparently traveling and unreachable. Because I'm still listed as next of kin in various legal documents despite years of estrangement. Despite her telling people I'd abandoned the family. Despite all the narratives she constructed about why we weren't in contact. I feel strange when I hang up the phone. Not grief exactly. Not the sharp pain of loss that I imagine most people feel when their mother dies. But something more complicated, more ambiguous. A sadness for what never was. For the relationship we never had. For the mother she could have been if she'd made different choices, if she'd valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide her. If she'd been capable of real love rather than the transactional alternatives she offered. I don't attend the funeral, don't feel obligated to perform grief. I don't want to participate in public mourning that would feel dishonest, that would suggest a relationship we didn't have that would give Victoria and the extended family permission to act as if everything was fine between us. As if my absence from my mother's life for the last decade was just a phase, just a misunderstanding. Just something that can now be swept aside because death erases history, because families should come together in times of grief, because surely I can put aside money anger for one day to honor the woman who gave birth to me. But giving birth to me doesn't erase what she did afterward, doesn't create obligation that survives beyond death, doesn't require me to participate in rituals that would feel like betrayal of myself, of my boundaries, of the hard work I've done to heal from the damage she inflicted. David asks if I'm sure, if I might regret not going, if there's any part of me that feels like I should be there. I appreciate that he asks, appreciate that he's giving me space to reconsider. But my answer is clear, definitive, rooted in deep certainty about what I need, what's healthy for me, what honors the person I've become, rather than the daughter she wanted me to be. I'm sure, I say. And I am, completely and without reservation, sure that my mother lost the right to my presence. My grief, my participation in family rituals when she chose to steal from me, to lie to me, to treat me as someone whose feelings and rights and fundamental humanity mattered less than her convenience, her comfort, her endless appetite for more. I hear later that the funeral was well attended, that many people spoke about her generosity, her dedication to charitable causes, her grace and elegance and the life she built, that Victoria gave a moving eulogy about their close relationship, about what a wonderful mother she was, about how much she'll be missed. The public performance continues even after death, the narrative carefully maintained, the image preserved of a woman who was admired, respected, beloved by everyone who knew her. But I knew her differently, knew her as someone who was willing to commit fraud against her own daughter, who forged signatures and stole money, and then tried to blame the victim for being upset about it, who never apologized, never took responsibility, never acknowledged the harm she caused. That's the truth of who she was, regardless of how many buildings have her name on them, regardless of how many charity galas she chaired, regardless of how many people believed the performance she gave for audiences. 10 years after the settlement, I'm sitting in my garden watching Eleanor play, marveling at her confidence, her certainty in her own value, her comfort with taking up space and making noise and asserting herself without apologizing. She's only 2, but already I can see that she's growing up different from how I grew up, that she's learning she's allowed to have opinions, allowed to express displeasure, allowed to say no without fearing that she'll be punished for asserting boundaries. I'm doing this differently, I think. I'm giving her what I didn't have, what I had to learn through painful experience and expensive therapy, and years of undoing the damage that came from growing up in a family that treated love as conditional, that measured my worth by my compliance, that required me to be less than I was in order to make other people feel more important. David joins me on the bench, hands me a cup of coffee, and we sit together in comfortable silence, watching our daughter, thinking our own thoughts, existing together in the kind of partnership that doesn't require constant conversation, constant activity, constant performance of togetherness. Do you ever regret it? He asks, and I know without clarification what he's asking about. Whether I regret cutting off my family, whether I wonder what my life would be like if I'd made different choices, if I'd forgiven them, if I'd prioritized family unity over personal boundaries. I think about the question seriously, really considering it rather than just giving him the answer I know he expects. Do I regret it? Do I wish things had gone differently? Do I miss having a mother and a sister? Even if those relationships were toxic, even if they required me to be smaller, even if they demanded constant vigilance and careful self-protection. No, I say finally, and I mean it absolutely. Feel the truth of it settle into my bones with complete certainty. Not for a single moment. Cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. It gave me space to become who I actually am, rather than who they needed me to be. It protected me from ongoing harm. It let me build this life, this family, this version of myself that's so much healthier, so much stronger, so much more authentic than what I was when I was still trying to maintain those relationships. He nods, squeezes my hand, and we watch Eleanor together. Watch her stack blocks with intense concentration. Watch her knock them down with gleeful satisfaction. Watch her rebuild without frustration. Without fear that failure means she's inadequate. Without the self-doubt that comes from growing up believing you have to be perfect to be loved. This is my revenge, I think. This is my victory. Not the money I recovered. Not the settlement I won. Not the justice I extracted through legal channels. But this life I've built, this family I've created, this peace I've found by refusing to accept unacceptable treatment, by establishing boundaries that protect me, by choosing authenticity over performance, truth over comfortable lies, my own well-being over family obligation. They thought I was weak, thought I was manageable, thought I would always accept whatever they chose to give me because I lacked the strength or the courage or the basic self-respect to demand better. They were wrong, and that wrongness, that fundamental miscalculation about who I am and what I'm capable of, is the victory I carry with me every day, the quiet triumph of becoming myself despite their attempts to keep me small. Despite their expectations that I would stay in my assigned place, despite their certainty that I would never dare to challenge them, to fight back, to win. The trust fund they tried to steal is still there, managed now by administrators I trust, distributed according to my father's original intentions rather than their creative reinterpretations. The accounts that should have had millions contain those millions, plus growth, plus the money they were forced to repay, plus the penalties they paid for their crimes. But more importantly, my life contains joy and authenticity and relationships built on genuine care rather than obligation. And my daughter is growing up knowing she's valuable, worthy, deserving of respect and honesty and love that doesn't come with conditions, with requirements, with the constant anxiety of wondering when you'll fail to meet expectations and what the consequences will be. That $1 I left in their accounts before I froze everything. That red alert they triggered when they tried to access funds that were no longer there. That moment when they realized I'd been paying attention, that I'd seen what they were doing, that I had the power to stop them and the courage to use it. That was just the beginning. The real revenge, the lasting victory, is this life I've built without them, this person I've become in their absence, this freedom I've claimed by refusing to let blood relation create obligation, by choosing myself over family drama, by understanding that sometimes the healthiest choice is distance, that sometimes the strongest act is walking away, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say no more, not ever, not under any circumstances. This ends now and it ends permanently. They wanted me small and grateful and manageable. I chose to be myself instead. Game over indeed. And I won.